Greetings, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Nerd Variety Podcast. I am your host, Hannah, and I am joined by my other hosts, Hunter.
Hi.
And Josh.
Hey.
Hey.
What's up?
Hey. We're all back again. This week we are picking a topic that's slightly topical? I don't know.
I'm sorry, is that Josh's chair that is like super squeaky, or is that Hannah?
Is that is probably my chair. I'll stop moving.
Because I keep hearing it. I'm like, what is that?
Not me.
It
Although
was me.
apologies in advance if you heard my cat. She's been really annoying recently.
Yeah.
But we're talking about something today that's a little bit topical. We're going to be talking about apocalypse media. Not that I think that we're in the apocalypse right now, but
We definitely are in the apocalypse.
give it a month and ask me again.
Yeah, it's not. Society hasn't crumbled yet. We're not in a Great Depression. Not yet.
I mean, we're waiting. I mean, I am personally, but you know, that's like.
I'm in a mild depression.
That's a different thing.
Like, I mean, we're waiting until June, right? Until we see the big, the pentagram on Earth.
Yeah. I don't know.
Until the pentagram of on the U.S. is completed, and then all these souls will be extracted and taken to a central location to feed the Dark Lord. Actually,
that's July. That takes an extra month.
Yeah, he completely missed that Full Metal Alchemist.
It seems like you missed my Doom Eternal reference. So
I thought we were talking about Supernatural.
Well, because
we're just all on different pages, so you know.
I'm still on Doom.
Whatever.
So we're going to be talking about some apocalypse stories in games and TV and movies. But I guess the first thing I want to talk about is what's the difference between apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic, and which one, if either, do you guys prefer?
So I think, of course, I'm going to talk first because I'm the most chatty.
Usually, yeah. Go for it.
I kind of think I like apocalypse stories better because I feel like they're more rare. At least that's what I think I've found trying to do research on this, or I just was bad doing research. And to me, like, the difference is, apocalypse stories is like you're in it. It's happening. There's more of a struggle, more of a fighting back. And I think for it to really count as an apocalypse story, it has to end with, some like whoever's fighting against the apocalypse, whoever's pushing against that loses, basically.
Yeah, I feel like
that brings you to the apocalypse.
I feel like you get that really common sort of sensation where it's like you want them to lose because it's like the apocalypse, but you also want them to win because it's a movie most of the time, and it's like, okay, well, we can't leave off like, well, that just was sucked and was terrible. So you end up with this kind of weird, like, just sort of like, this is okay ending, where it's like, everything sucks, but like, we have like some small amount of hope that keeps us going, and like, there's like this really tiny positive thing that comes out at the end that makes you feel like maybe it'll be okay, but it's still really like negative and terrible.
Yeah, I mean,
the people that you followed in the story, they mostly made it with various psyches and side characters that survived.
So I think about like I Am Legend, right?
Yeah.
Where the story revolves around this guy and his dog, and spoiler alert, both the guy and the dog are dead by the end of the movie.
What?
Right? But he meets this lady and her son, and they end up taking an antidote, or a hypothetical antidote, to like a society that's been built in the midst of all of this. So it's like your main character's dead, and his dog is dead, and that was the worst part.
It is. I mean, who cares if the guy dies, but
right,
the dog died?
The dog died, but like there is still this amount of hope.
He had to kill the dog.
I know. Oh, that seems so heart-wrenching.
If you ever are in a situation where you have to kill a dog, I'm not going to say kill yourself first, because that's bad, but just make someone else do it.
We had to kill an animal not too long ago at my house, and it was terrible. Like, It wasn't a pet, but it was like, okay, this is kind of getting off topic, but my sister's cat, like, maimed a bird. And
cats are okay.
Yeah.
No, we didn't kill the cat. We had to kill the bird, and it was terrible because it didn't work the first time, and it was it was not good.
No.
Yeah, it was a little songbird. So sad. Anyway, we did save a bunny last week though, so that was good.
Okay.
That evens out.
A life for a life.
We're doing fine. Yeah. Yeah. Oh no, here's the cat. Yeah, but I think it's interesting because it might be one of the few genres where you do end up with that like really kind of conflicting emotional feeling at the end, where like everything is terrible, but maybe not everything is terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like you take a lot of hits, but you still kind of enjoy the ride or enjoy the gradual like fall of the house of cards or the Jenga tower.
Right.
It's like, man, it fell. It all it's all in pieces now.
Well, I mean, and that's a good point, because one thing that I was going to say for what apocalypse versus post-apocalypse is that like apocalypse is that's my understanding or my interpretation is that is usually the ending or destruction usually of like a civilization and like society as you know it, and then post-apocalypse is usually dealing with that and almost always creating like a new kind of civilization for the state of the world after everything has ended.
So this kind of leads into my next question, which I feel like is maybe like the third stage in the evolution there. So I would say maybe it would tend to go in terms of like apocalypse, post-apocalypse, and then you end up with the dystopian genre, which I feel like is frequently like the aftermath of the post-apocalypse, where it's like we've created this new society, but there's something wrong with it. I feel like, and it's almost always in a dystopian kind of story, almost always the result of an apocalypse. I feel.
Yeah. And I guess, I can see that. I think maybe almost always. I'd have to do more research on that specifically, but not always in my from some examples I'm thinking of. But
what are you thinking of?
Well, I'm thinking like the first thing that came to my mind was Wolfenstein, which is not really, there's not really an apocalypse. It's just like an alternate, it's like a what if the Nazis won World War II. So that's not really apocalypse, but it's, I mean, it is, but it's not like the destruction of like all life.
Yeah, so it's kind of to me also like the one that comes to mind for me is the Hunger Games, where it's like it wasn't the apocalypse, but it was like a huge war, and the world that you see at the beginning of the books and the movies is a result of the aftermath of that war.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not necessarily an apocalypse, but it's some sort of disastrous thing that radically changes the way that society is done.
Yeah.
I feel
like some kind of natural disaster or some some explosion a nuclear explosion that went off, like some kind of accidental explosion or experiment gone wrong, like a virus or a zombie outbreak.
Yeah, and I would even
everybody, and then you're kind of left with, okay, what's going on? What's wrong with the world after this? We're alive, but what's wrong? Oh, the air is poison. Oh, there's a corrupt government. Oh, there are bandits and wild animals running loose, and we have to figure out how to.
Yeah, and I would even say that like The Walking Dead in the later seasons seems like it could even be close to like a dystopian kind of thing, except dystopia comes from like utopia, and it's clearly not a utopia, right? It's not like designed to be perfect, but there's something wrong. But it's actually not like that far off, because it's like we have these societies that we're trying to rebuild, but like just none of them are working.
Well, again, like I would consider the later seasons of Walking Dead to be more post-apocalyptic, whereas most of the seasons I would think are apocalyptic or apocalypse.
But I do feel like there's a logical progression through like apocalypse, post-apocalypse, dystopia, like down the line somewhere.
Yeah.
The Walking Dead is like broken up. Fear the Walking Dead takes place like right as the apocalypse is breaking out, and shows a little more of it than I think the actual Walking Dead show. So you see like a family that's surviving from the start of it to like the middle. I know they're in like season 5 right now. They just ended season 5, so they're kind of like somewhere in the middle of it. And then The Walking Dead takes place probably like somewhere near the whenever Rick goes into his coma, between Rick going into his coma, waking up, and then
like 10 years later now.
Well, Rick waking up from his coma. It was yeah, basically.
It's actually been.
And then there's that show I mentioned.
Yeah,
but they fast forward in future seasons.
I think it's in season 9.
The last season, spoiler alert. Yeah, they jump forward about 6 years or so. But there's a new show coming out, Walking Dead: World Beyond, where they're going to show what happened show the world 10 years later. So that'll be a little more dystopian than post-apocalyptic.
Yeah, but I mean, to me, like post-apocalyptic isn't like, to me, I don't think, like, I agree that it can and many times does go from apocalypse to post-apocalypse to dystopia, but I don't think it always does.
No, I don't think it always does.
Like, again, a couple that I'm thinking of, very different time periods though, like The Last of Us, even though most of that game is post-apocalypse, like you see the apocalypse at the beginning of the game and then you cut to like 20 years later or something, and it's still more of a post-apocalypse world, I would say, because they don't really have the good semblance of society yet. But
I feel like maybe that's the difference.
Yeah.
Is like post-apocalyptic, I would say, is, I don't know, more surrounding like continued survival, and dystopian is more about like society as a whole. I feel like might be where you could draw the line, but I think that if we've learned anything in our conversations about genres, is that the lines are very blurry. Yeah.
But and then the other one that came to my mind was Horizon Zero Dawn, which I don't know how much you guys are aware of that, but it's like, there's basically the apocalypse, and then like thousands of years later or something, that's when it takes place, and basically human civilization has, like, you have this really advanced technology. It's like this super intelligent AI, and it's like all the wildlife, you get like animal versions or robot versions of animals, so they're all AI and all that. But everything else, like the humans, they're in like these tribes, and they're scavenging, like they're making armor and weapons from what they hunt and kill. So it's more of a like caveman era, whatever, type civilization in that sense. But of course it's thousands of years after the apocalypse, so that I don't tend to think of as dystopian, but again, that's still post-apocalyptic.
Right.
And again, that's in my opinion. But.
Yeah. I just wanted to talk about it because I was looking for like post-apocalyptic movies, and a couple came up that I'm like, is that really post-apocalyptic though? So like The Hunger Games and Maze Runner, things like that. It's like, that's not, is it?
Yeah.
I don't know. So... And those are just like the young adults I come up with.
Yeah, because they just kind of focus on like the mission. Without talking too much about the world. They try not to talk too much about the world. Just kind of like those characters' stories and where they go. I mean, Hunger Games does go into them trying to change things to a more. I mean, I feel like they're in a dystopian world.
Yeah, they definitely. Yeah, they definitely are closer to a dystopian. But again, I feel like it's just sort of like a scale.
Yeah. I will put I Am Legend closer to post-apocalyptic.
Sure, but I could totally imagine, like I said, that woman and her child going into that new built society, and all of a sudden you have a part 2 that's dystopian, but it's like the same universe.
Exactly.
Right, so I feel like there is a progression. Yeah,
and then Maze Runner, I'm just not very familiar with. I know there was some kind of thing called the flare, and it caused this evil head, this evil leadership to take over. I don't know.
So yeah, it's and I don't know as much about it either. I got like halfway through the first audiobook, and then coronavirus happened and I stopped reading or listening to books. But Yeah, it seems like basically there was sort of a cataclysmic event, and therefore there was like this new faction of government essentially that happened because of that.
New World
So it's
Order.
essentially. So it's kind of playing in that weird middle ground of post-apocalyptic and dystopian.
Yeah.
Josh, we never heard from you. Which you prefer? I guess now we have 3 genres. But which do you prefer out of all of them?
Let's see. I do like post-apocalyptic because it's just like, oh, how are these people surviving? What are their mentalities like? Now versus what they were before the apocalypse. How did surviving change them, and how are they contributing to like growing to making things better instead of being selfish or being defeated.
Yeah,
So
I would say
post-apocalyptic has a lot of potential.
Yeah, I would say like in general, I feel like apocalyptic stuff is more about surviving, and post-apocalyptic is more about adapting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And to me, I feel like that's just more interesting. Yeah. Like, how are we going to deal with this now that it's happened? Like, what's next?
And dystopian is more about rebelling.
I would say that might be true. Yeah.
It is true.
Yeah. Apocalyptic, you can see it's there's not a whole lot of apocalyptic stuff out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and if it is, I feel like, because Hunter, you were talking about some in our kind of pre-recording.
During our recording.
Were you? I don't remember. Wow. But you mentioned like the Day After Tomorrow. That's what I'm thinking of. Where
I did not mention that.
Did you not mention that? You mentioned that one. I can't remember. Somebody mentioned it. But that's definitely like an apocalyptic, like where the heat of things. Not really.
I can see why you get me and Josh confused. We look very similar.
No.
I'm having a day, okay? Leave me alone. I'm just gonna drink my tea.
Drink your tea. What's in that tea?
It's just green tea with honey.
You don't want to know. It's got some hallucinogenics in it.
No, it's just green tea.
Well, actually, I was thinking earlier as well, and it could just be because this is what I've been indulging in a lot lately, but I feel like Star Wars has a lot of all of that in different places, but because it takes place in like a galaxy, it's on different scales for each thing. Like obviously there was an apocalypse for Alderaan. It didn't last very long.
No, it didn't.
Taurus in the Old Republic specifically has that apocalyptic and then post-apocalyptic phase. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It's in Knights of the Old Republic 1. You're on Taurus for a little bit, then it gets like destroyed, and then you have like by the time the Old Republic comes around, you're still seeing like the remnants of the world and how they're trying to rebuild and everything. Mm-hmm. But then you also have, of course, like the dystopian society.
I feel like that one's the most obvious.
Yeah, because that was in the original trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
And you have all that. So
yeah. Yeah, I was fascinated because I was doing some research and I looked up like best post-apocalyptic movies, and I was fascinated by like 4 that I came up with that I'm pretty familiar with and am a big fan of, but are in very different genres. Yeah. So like within this post-apocalyptic umbrella, there's a lot of variety you can have. So I thought of Zombieland and Warm Bodies, which I kind of paired together.
Yeah.
I do like Zombieland.
Yeah. Well, Zombieland is especially like, I would say, just fully a comedy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where Warm Bodies actually throws in like a romance element to it, and it's very strange, but I love it.
Yeah. Its main point, isn't it? It's like half its point.
It is, yeah.
I mean, I would call it, the two sides being Warm Bodies is romantic comedy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a rom-com.
But then Zombieland is action comedy.
Sure.
Exactly.
You guys made like weird expressions with Warm Bodies. I'm guessing you guys weren't fans.
I saw it, and it was a decent movie. It's just weird, but it was like I would watch it again. But
I almost saw it once.
It was different.
I would not ever go and say like it was a great movie, but I feel like it was quality entertainment. It was a fun movie. I enjoyed it. I think it's really stupid, but sometimes it's nice.
Yeah, strangely, every once in a while, I'll just randomly think of random parts from it. I don't know why. It's just weird.
It was funny. But I think part of it was it didn't take itself too seriously, and that was really important. Because if it took itself too seriously, it would have been completely terrible. But it kind of knew it was ridiculous, and that's why it was good.
Or if it took itself seriously, it's very possible it would have ended on the side of so bad it's good.
Possibly. Yeah. I prefer self-aware movies though, where it's like we know it's terrible and we're doing it anyway. I'm like, all right, I respect that.
Yeah, don't think too much about it. It's just just follow this train where it goes.
Yeah. But those are definitely like on the comedy side of things, and then I Am Legend is definitely like a really sort of dark, serious sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then one that I totally didn't think about, but I saw it on the list, and I was like, that's a fascinating point. Is WALL-E?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's post-apocalyptic, essentially. Like,
and
it wasn't
kind of dystopian.
Yeah, there wasn't like
Pretty
a cataclysmic event, but like the world has ended.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it was. Is that Disney's only like post-apocalyptic movie?
I'm sure it's not. I'd have to think, but no, especially not now with all the stuff that they have. Like, because I was also looking at a list, like Endgame and Infinity War. Those are definitely apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic.
That's not Disney.
I don't.
It is. That's what I'm saying.
It's not Disney, but it's not a Disney.
Again, that's what I'm saying. It depends on what you mean.
It's
Disney.
Marvel. It's not the same thing.
Have we had an episode on Disney?
No, but we probably should.
Write that down as my next topic.
Okay.
Next topic is Disney.
And maybe Disney will sponsors.
That would be, first of all, totally unrealistic, but also awesome. Disney, give us money. Disney, give us free stuff.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Disney give us free stuff.
Nintendo, give me free stuff.
Yeah. I wouldn't. I'm thinking of just WALL-E. I can't think of any other ones that.
Yeah, I feel like there's something, but I can't put my finger on it.
Yeah. Again, like, yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah. Well,
but I think it's interesting the variety of genre that you can create with that same sort of the world has ended, what now kind of situation.
Yeah.
So. And
actually, I wasn't gonna mention these, but if we're talking about comedy apocalypse too, one for sure. Actually, one I couldn't remember if it ended with apocalypse, like the apocalypse or post-apocalypse, was The World's End. The World's End. Yeah, that was the one, like it was the last of that trilogy, with Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End.
That would be the only one I haven't seen then.
Oh. Well,
I've seen Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz.
Also, probably just because I think they have similar names. I want to say they're released around the same time, but they don't really have much in common. But another one that I tend to think of is This Is the End. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It's a really stupid movie.
Yeah, it's the guy. All the comedy actors like James Franco and his crew all play themselves in the movie where they are trying to survive the end of the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Channing Tatum is like a sex slave, basically. It's weird. Yeah. And Emma Watson is wonderful in that.
I kind of want to see this now.
And then Michael, I always remember.
Is it wonderfully terrible?
Yeah. That's what I've heard. I need to watch it all the way through.
What's it called? This Is the End?
This is the end.
This is the end, yeah.
Brace yourself for the, near the end of the movie, there's a giant demon with his really large, thing between his legs.
I have been warned.
Yes. Yeah. Also, it's like my favorite version of Michael Cera doing Michael Cera. He is just the biggest douche.
Okay.
He is.
But you got to give him credit for taking it in stride.
I wanted to talk briefly
Controversy.
about specifically apocalypse games, because I feel like games are more likely to be set during the apocalypse than like
Mhm.
afterward.
See, I was
Yeah.
feeling not, but
No.
again, I don't know. Maybe it's just I don't play a lot of them.
Well, I feel like it's because it might be because it's more action oriented, and like a survival game is a really common
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
But like a game where it's like, oh shoot, like I need to, harvest parts from this thing and make another thing because like this is useless to me now and I gotta do this, is like not, I feel like, as appreciated of a genre of game.
Yeah.
This sort of like foraging, I don't know, Minecraft, I guess technically could be post-apocalyptic, depending on what lore you believe. But
But you
Ark
look
is
at,
post-apocalyptic,
a lot of-
right?
Ark,
What?
Yeah, isn't that?
I don't know. It could be.
But you have games where, like, I think, like Resident Evil is. You have these survival games where you are trying to survive, like a cataclysm or an outbreak, and you're trying to survive and get to a point where you can be safe, quote unquote.
Yeah, and I don't know.
As without really,
Mhm.
but that's all you really get. It's not really focusing on like the apocalypse itself too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. But it seems like it lends itself better to sort of the high stress environment that you would get from something that's like
Oh yeah.
directly after the apocalypse,
Yeah.
if not during.
A couple that come to my mind immediately are like the World War Z game, which I didn't play much of. I played a little bit, but yeah, that one, because it's like World War Z, which is an apocalypse thing, and then The Division. I would also say that's apocalypse, leaning towards post-apocalypse as well. Yeah.
Well, I guess especially with how popular like first-person shooters are, like versus the popularity of like solely action movies. Right? I feel like first-person shooter games are much more popular than action movies.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And even things like I Am Legend, where it's definitely pretty. I guess you could say it's an action movie, but like I don't.
It is. I mean,
But it's not nearly as like constantly intense as a video game could be.
Yeah.
No.
Right? There's a lot of quiet and a lot of downtime, and that's part of what makes it like really kind of terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. Or I can imagine it. Well, they could go the route of like, okay, this is a apocalyptic game, and you have to make sure that you and your family survive, like and escape New York or whatever. Dealing with all the stuff that comes with an apocalypse or the world ending, via like crazy people, or falling buildings, or just having to salvage something, or hotwire a car.
Yeah, and I definitely praise like the people at Telltale, because I've only played one of their Walking Dead games, and it's like the game I played was rough.
Yeah. Did you
like,
play
honestly,
season 1?
Yeah. Well, I played the first one, yes.
Yeah.
And I need to play the rest of them, but honestly, like, you can't just sit down and play that game. Like, it takes a real, like, emotional toll on you sometimes. And you're like, holy moly. And I really applaud them for that, because, like, feel like it's very, especially it being a game instead of a movie. We've talked about this before, like, that personal aspect of it, of, like, you have to do this, like, you're going through the situation.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like in every Telltale game I've played, I've had to make choices I just wasn't happy with in any situation.
It's just gonna happen. That's
right.
a thing with all Telltale games.
But I love it because it's exactly what should happen. And I think that that's really, really awesome, especially in a post-apocalyptic sort of thing.
Yeah. And I know I mentioned before, but I hate that, because I don't want the characters to remember what I did or what I had to do at that time. I want them to be able to go about my day, or have to choose between, this thing or this thing, that's both are equally bad.
I hate it and I love it.
That's always the thing, right? You hate it when you see this person will remember that. You're like,
what do they remember?
Oh my god.
What do they think?
They hurt.
I don't know.
What they do?
They took it the wrong way. They had to.
Yeah. Well, it's actually funny because I've thought before about like the impact that games like that have on like your social awareness, and especially stuff like I don't know, stuff like, this is getting off topic, but stuff like dating sims or games where it's like you have to like walk around and meet friends, right? This idea of like the things you say something and there's immediately like a -1 tick above someone's head and you're like, oh shit, right? Like if and like I wonder how that affects people's social awareness, being like, oh, they're gonna remember that, and like I said something that was like really important in some way or another. I don't know. I just think that's interesting.
Yeah.
Kind of taking social cues from being like, how would a person respond to this?
See, video games do help real life.
Yeah,
They
totally.
do. They really do. Hand-eye coordination, quick decision-making.
Social skills, which is one people don't think of.
Yeah. No, I legitimately had moments where I was like talking to one of my sisters and being like, this is going to negatively affect our relationship if I say that. I'm not going to say that. Like, not a good idea.
Yeah. It's like, can I have dialogue options? I'm having a hard time figuring.
Yeah. But I appreciate, and I'll say again, I love and hate the fact that like in the Telltale games, they give you these situations that are like so painful, but it's painful because like that's what you would actually have to deal with in that situation.
Yeah.
And it's really amazing that they like encapsulate that anxiety.
Yeah, that social poker that you're playing.
Yeah, it's just like, ugh.
Like,
well, and not even that, but like in the Batman games, it's like, do you turn this guy in, or do you like try and reform him, or
the
like
Batman games? The Batman Telltale are tough, especially.
They're tough.
I think
They're really tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my kind of final question here is, why are we drawn to this kind of story, these post-apocalyptic, because I took a class one time when the entire thing we talked about was monsters and like where our fears come from, right? So our fears of like the monster Jack the Ripper, or kind of like the personification of him in games and stuff, comes from this fear of like these overpopulated cities and like this kind of hazy like London is kind of like the image that you get, where it's like you don't know what's around the corner. But then there's also like games that play on your fears of like the great outdoors and things like Slender Man, and it's like it could be anywhere, right? But like, what is it that it makes this kind of thing so appealing to watch?
Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe I think people like to try to predict the future, and we like watching these things and being like, I haven't thought about that. That's going to be something that we need to look out for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have this fascination for like, how is it all going to end if it ends? And it's like, well, we have, there's the whole, nuclear war thing, which they portray in like, what's something they portrayed in? They actually kind of portrayed in Terminator 3, but in an indirect way, because it was a robot that did it, but we could do it ourselves easily. Nuclear war. 2012 had a doomsday prophecy that the world's going to implode on itself, or of course we have the common one is a zombie outbreak or a viral outbreak.
So it sounds like basically we are as our technology progresses, finding more ways that we could accidentally kill ourselves.
I think so.
Yeah. Or what could still get us, even though we've come so far.
Well, and especially when you talk about Endgame, I wonder if like
an alien will come out and snap his fingers after collecting 5 unstoppable gems.
Kind of like this idea that like we're kind of suffering from an overpopulation problem right now.
It's okay. We're working on it.
Oh no.
No, but I mean, in most of these stories, you're learning about like what the world is like when you have half the population or less, right?
Yeah, which I would love to see. I'd love to see like an expanded like series of like that 5 years, because they just kind of gloss over it in Endgames. Like 5 years, everyone's sad and there's a lot of people died.
Sad.
Yeah, but
there
remember,
there would have been like a lot more like chaos that ensued, and I feel like there was more. There would be more to it.
But didn't Spider-Man Homecoming take place during that time?
No. Homecoming took place right after Civil War.
Yeah, but it
Marvel
took place 8 years after Civil War.
No, that's a timeline issue.
It is an interesting point though, because we talked last week about, in a completely different context, we talked about the five stages of grief.
Yeah, in
right?
Majora's Mask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like,
also apocalypse movie.
True.
Or game. Yeah.
But it's like, did they really like not get through all these steps in like 5 years? Like you'd think that 5 years later they would have like gotten their butts into action and like started trying to get back together, like get the world back together.
I mean, they were.
Yeah.
They were trying to do stuff.
Or were they so busy with like getting everything kind of semi-stable to then realize that we lost and we're not getting everything everything can't go back the way it was.
Yeah. Plus they had an entire
still kind of
like galaxy to deal with, or maybe universe. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you remember Captain Marvel's like, yeah, this isn't just happening on Earth. This is happening everywhere, and I got to deal with all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but when you guys are like, yeah, they're just sad now. It's like, that was like stage 3 or something. Like, we're not past this.
Nope.
5 stages of grief.
No.
And I mean, I guess it would be hard if you're like constantly reminded of it, but.
Yeah. But still, Disney make an expanded series about the 5 years between Infinity War and Endgame, please.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. That'd be really interesting. Yeah. All right, well, any honorable mentions, anything that we wanted to mention but didn't get to?
Well, also because I've been playing through it recently, actually for the last year or so, probably. I'm really slow with games sometimes. Quantum Break is kind of like that sort of thing. It's like, there's this whole time thing, and essentially time is breaking, so you have to go through all this stuff to try to save it. But
yeah. One of the ones that I actually just remembered today that I really enjoyed, and there were like 2 or 3 seasons. I don't remember how many seasons there were, but then it just kind of ended, and everyone was like, "What the heck?" And then they picked it up again for a final like half season, but it didn't really resolve itself well. So if you're gonna watch it, know that. But otherwise, it was pretty good. Was Jericho?
Yeah, I remember hearing about
that one.
Which, so it's essentially there's like a nuclear attack on the United States, and Denver is one of the cities hit by a nuke. And this takes place in like a town pretty far away, but they have to deal with like fallout and then just sort of like society afterwards, and like, what does that look like, and what do we do, and we can't contact the government, and is there anybody there, kind of thing. And it was done really well.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, Fallout is post-apocalypse.
Yeah, and I want to recommend for apocalyptic movies, War of the Worlds, 2005 with Tom Cruise. 2012, it's insane, but it's pretty accurate. It was fun for its time, and then of course it's not a really good one, but Day After Tomorrow, it's probably the worst of the 3. But,
I was like obsessed with that movie when I was in middle school. I don't know why.
God, it was so dumb. But it's an interesting watch for middle school, at least.
Yeah. If you're looking for a great terrible movie, Day After Tomorrow is
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a good bad time.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, that's pretty much it for today. What are we doing next week?
Josh?
Me?
Josh.
It's on the schedule.
All right. I guess we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you will.
Until then, nerd out, everybody. See you next time.
See you guys.